Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe. It keeps the light of reason alive and helps us keep exploring powerful ideas together. Voltaire's philosophy begins with the unrelenting defense of reason against superstition, tyranny, and fanaticism. He believed that the greatest enemy of human progress is ignorance disguised as virtue and oppression justified by faith. His thought does not rest on abstract metaphysics or mystical revelation, but on the conviction that reason, dialogue, and tolerance are the tools by which humanity may rise from darkness into clarity. He looked upon history and saw that cruelty was most often carried out in the name of truth. Kings claimed divine sanction for conquest. Priests blessed the burning of heretics. Judges tortured in the name of justice. From this observation grew his lifelong principle: if a belief leads to persecution, that belief must be examined, mocked, and resisted. Voltaire's laughter was not idle. It was a weapon sharpened against fanaticism. He understood that to destroy superstition, one must ridicule it. He did not wage war with swords, but with wit. Mockery became a philosophical method. For him, satire was a form of enlightenment. To laugh at absurdity was to expose its weakness. The superstition that survives ridicule is already half refuted, for error thrives only in solemnity and fear. Voltaire's philosophy rests on skepticism, not the despairing skepticism that denies all truth, but the cautious skepticism that refuses blind certainty. Doubt, he wrote, is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. This single statement captures his intellectual spirit. Human beings, limited in perception and judgment, must live with uncertainty. But this limitation is not a curse, it is a call to humility. The philosopher's task is not to invent absolute systems, but to dispel illusions. His skepticism extended to every domain: theology, politics, metaphysics, and history. In religion, he saw not revelation, but confusion, 1,000 competing creeds claiming divine authority. He asked, if truth were given by God, why would it divide men rather than unite them? His answer was simple. Religion was not born from divine truth, but from human fear. Men, afraid of death and chaos, invented gods to comfort themselves, and priests to interpret their will. From fear came superstition. From superstition came tyranny. Voltaire was not an atheist, at least not in the crude sense. He believed in God as the supreme watchmaker, a rational architect who set the universe in motion but did not intervene in its petty affairs. To deny this creator, he argued, would be as unreasonable as to deny that a clock requires a maker. Yet his God was silent and rational, far removed from the vengeful deity of holy wars. Religion, for Voltaire, should not be a chain that binds the mind, but a moral compass grounded in reason and compassion. If God exists, Voltaire said, it is not to damn, but to inspire tolerance. The true believer, he insisted, is not the one who kneels most fervently, but the one who harms no one. Tolerance became the cornerstone of his moral philosophy. He saw that intolerance, not disbelief, was the root of evil. In every age, those who claimed to serve God most zealously were those who tortured, burned, and silenced them in His name. To be tolerant, therefore, is to be truly pious, for it honors the divine by respecting human dignity. In politics, Voltaire's philosophy was guided by pragmatism and moderation. He distrusted both absolute monarchy and revolutionary utopia. What mattered to him was not the ideal form of government, but the degree to which it protected freedom of thought, justice, and individual happiness. He admired the English system because it balanced power and permitted open debate. Liberty, he believed, was not an abstraction, but a habit of society, a product of laws, manners, and the courage to speak freely. Freedom of speech for Voltaire was sacred. He knew that words could liberate or destroy, and that silence was the ally of oppression. Though he never wrote the famous line, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," the sentiment perfectly captures his belief. He held that no idea should be beyond criticism, no authority beyond question. The right to speak was the foundation of all other rights, for without it, truth itself would perish. Voltaire's economic and social thought followed the same rational principle that progress arises from the free exchange of ideas, goods, and labor. He opposed both feudal privilege and the arrogance of birth. Merit, not ancestry, should determine worth. He believed in work as a moral and civic virtue, not as punishment, but as the means by which human beings create meaning and dignity. Work, he wrote in Candide, keeps us from three great evils: boredom, vice, and need. This view of labor reflects his larger moral realism. Voltaire did not dream of perfect worlds. He despised the false optimism of philosophers who claimed that all is for the best in the best of possible worlds. His character, Pangloss, who insists on finding perfection in disaster, is the embodiment of blind metaphysical faith. Against such illusions, Voltaire affirmed a simple truth: the world is not perfect and evil exists. But the response to evil is not resignation or abstract speculation, it is action. To improve life, one must work, think, and build. In Candide, this idea takes the form of the garden. The command, "we must cultivate our garden," is not a retreat from the world, but a call to responsible engagement. It means that one must tend to the small sphere of one's own life, reason, and duties, instead of dreaming of universal systems. The garden is both literal and symbolic, a metaphor for rational effort amid chaos. It is the emblem of Voltaire's mature philosophy, a philosophy of lucidity, humility, and constructive skepticism. Voltaire's defense of reason was not an abstract love of logic, it was a moral duty. He believed that ignorance and superstition were the roots of cruelty. When people abandon reason, they become capable of anything: burning heretics, torturing dissenters, enslaving others, or persecuting neighbors. He saw in fanaticism the ultimate corruption of the soul, the moment when moral conscience is replaced by obedience to ideology. A fanatic no longer thinks, he only obeys, convinced that his violence is virtue. To fight fanaticism, Voltaire wielded not hatred, but irony. He understood that direct confrontation often hardens belief, but laughter dissolves it. His wit was not cruelty, it was surgical clarity. He used it to separate truth from falsehood, to expose hypocrisy, and to make power ridiculous. In doing so, he taught that laughter can be a weapon of freedom. Tyranny depends on solemnity. Mockery is its undoing. Voltaire's skepticism extended even to philosophy itself. He distrusted metaphysical systems that claimed to explain everything. He observed that philosophers, like theologians, could become dogmatists in their own way. For every rationalist who declared reason supreme, there arose another who used reason to justify oppression. Voltaire's solution was to limit philosophy to its proper domain, to questions that can be investigated through experience, observation, and dialogue. Beyond that, humility is required. This humility led him to admire the scientific spirit of his age. He saw in the work of Newton and Locke a new kind of enlightenment, knowledge grounded in evidence, experiment, and tolerance of uncertainty. Science, for Voltaire, was not only a method, but a moral model. It showed that truth could be pursued without persecution. The scientist does not burn his opponent, he tests his hypothesis. In that simple fact lay a revolution in human affairs. He argued that reason and faith could coexist only if faith submitted to reason. Religion should serve morality, not dominate it. He proposed a deistic faith, belief in a creator who endowed humanity with intelligence and conscience, and who asks only that we use them. In this view, revelation and dogma are unnecessary. The divine law is written in the heart as compassion and justice. Such a religion would unite rather than divide because it rests not on mysteries, but on universal human experience. From this foundation arose Voltaire's humanism. He regarded the human being not as a fallen creature doomed by sin, but as a rational and moral agent capable of progress. Human nature was not perfect, but it was improvable. Education, tolerance, and justice could refine it. Against pessimists who saw humanity as inherently corrupt, Voltaire insisted that reason and kindness could overcome barbarism. Against utopians who imagined immediate perfection, he warned that progress must be patient, guided by modest reform rather than revolution. His view of morality reflected this balance between realism and optimism. Moral virtue, for Voltaire, was not obedience to divine law, but sympathy guided by reason. The truly good person is not one who prays the loudest, but one who does the least harm and the most good. Charity, forgiveness, and fairness are the virtues of an enlightened mind. Sin, in his philosophy, is ignorance that persists despite knowledge, the refusal to think, the indulgence in cruelty, or the defense of injustice under the cloak of faith. Voltaire also redefined justice. For him, justice is not vengeance or blind legality, it is the rational protection of human dignity. He fought against arbitrary punishments, torture, and religious persecution. His famous campaigns for the wrongly condemned, Calas, Sirven, and La Barre, were acts of living philosophy. Each case revealed the cruelty that arises when institutions serve dogma instead of truth. For Voltaire, every innocent man condemned is an accusation against civilization.
His sense of justice was rooted in empathy. He believed that compassion is the true test of reason. A mind that understands the fragility of life cannot remain indifferent to suffering. Compassion was not weakness, but wisdom, the recognition that our happiness depends on the happiness of others. He saw intolerance as a form of fear and ignorance, and compassion as the fruit of understanding. A world governed by reason would therefore be a world of tolerance. Voltaire's view of history followed the same rational pattern. He rejected the notion that history was a divine drama guided by providence. Instead, he sought natural causes, economic interests, cultural habits, the ambitions of rulers, and the power of ideas. His essay on the customs and the spirit of nations was one of the first attempts to write history as a science of humanity, rather than a chronicle of kings and miracles. In doing so, he replaced divine intervention with human responsibility. This view of history made him deeply aware of the fragility of progress. Civilizations rise and fall not because of fate, but because of ignorance, greed, and intolerance. The achievements of reason can always be undone by fanaticism. For that reason, vigilance is the price of enlightenment. Each generation must defend the liberty of thought anew, for power always seeks to silence it. Voltaire's philosophy thus demands perpetual resistance, not through violence, but through the steady exercise of reason, speech, and irony. Voltaire's war against tyranny was not fought with swords, but with sentences. He saw clearly that the most dangerous tyrant is not the one who commands armies, but the one who commands minds. When a people cease to think, they no longer need chains. Their ignorance enslaves them more completely than any prison. For Voltaire, freedom of thought was the first freedom, the root from which all others grow. Without it, there can be no progress, no justice, no truth. His defense of freedom was not sentimental. He understood that liberty carries risks. Free thought can produce error, falsehood, even madness. But the alternative, intellectual servitude, is far worse. Better a society that errs in freedom than one that obeys in silence. The free mind may stumble, but it learns. The obedient mind never does. Voltaire's trust in liberty was therefore not naive optimism, but practical wisdom. He believed that open debate, though messy, leads eventually to enlightenment, because truth, once spoken, cannot be entirely suppressed. He viewed censorship as a confession of weakness. Only lies fear the light of inquiry. A government or church that silences criticism betrays its own insecurity. Voltaire mocked censors as men who fear ideas as children fear thunder. He wrote that one should think for oneself and let others do the same, because diversity of opinion is not chaos, it is the natural condition of reason. A uniformity of thought is the symptom of death. In his political philosophy, Voltaire was no revolutionary, but he was no servant of authority either. He sought a rational middle ground, enlightened reform. He admired England's constitutional system, where monarchy was limited by law and parliament, and where thinkers like Newton and Locke could flourish. He argued that the best government is one that guarantees liberty of conscience, protects property, and encourages education. Power, when restrained by reason and law, could serve the public good. When unchecked, it became barbarism in silk. His idea of the enlightened monarch was controversial. Voltaire believed that in a world still ruled by kings, reform must begin at the top. If philosophers could advise rulers to govern rationally, they might transform despotism into justice. It was a pragmatic strategy, not idealism. He did not expect the masses to overthrow their masters. He expected reason to penetrate the courts of power. This was his hope with Frederick the Great of Prussia and Catherine of Russia, though he later saw that even the most philosophical rulers were still tempted by vanity and conquest. Voltaire's critique of power was subtle. He knew that tyranny often hides behind virtue. A ruler who claims to act for the good of the people may in truth seek only obedience. He warned that moral pretexts are the mask of despotism. He said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." This insight, that false beliefs create real horrors, remains one of the deepest truths of his philosophy. He also exposed the hypocrisy of nobility and privilege. Titles and birth, he said, are accidents. Virtue and intellect are what make a person noble. He mocked aristocrats who prided themselves on ancestry rather than character, comparing them to potatoes. He joked the best part of them is underground. Such wit was not mere insult, it was moral surgery. He sought to awaken self-awareness, to pierce the vanity that blinds both rulers and subjects.
Voltaire's economic thought, though less systematic, reflected his belief in liberty and reason. He saw commerce as a civilizing force because it makes people depend on one another's needs rather than on conquest. "Go into the Exchange of London," he wrote, "and you will see representatives of all nations meeting for the benefit of mankind. Here the Jew, the Mohammedan, and the Christian deal with one another as if they were of the same faith. Commerce, unlike fanaticism, teaches tolerance. It binds people through interest, not ideology. Yet he also warned that wealth without virtue becomes corruption. Money should serve progress, not greed. He despised both the parasitic nobility who consumed without working and the avaricious merchants who valued profit above justice. True prosperity, for Voltaire, was measured not by riches, but by enlightenment, by the flourishing of intellect, art, and humanity. His skepticism toward absolute systems extended even to optimism itself. In Candide, he mocked the blind optimism of Leibniz's philosophy, the belief that all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. For Voltaire, this idea was both absurd and cruel, a way to excuse evil rather than confront it. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755, which killed tens of thousands, shattered any illusion of a perfectly ordered world. Evil, he insisted, is real, and philosophy must face it without denial. The moral of Candide is simple but profound. Life is not an abstract problem to be solved, but a field to be cultivated. We must cultivate our garden, he concludes, meaning that we must act where we are, improve what we can, and accept that perfection is not of this world. This humble wisdom, a call to labor rather than lament, captures the essence of Voltaire's philosophy. It is practical, realistic, and humane. He did not promise salvation or utopia. He offered clarity. The purpose of thought is not to build castles in the air, but to dispel illusions. The good life, in Voltaire's view, is one of reason, moderation, and compassion. It rejects fanaticism and superstition, embraces curiosity, and finds meaning in useful work and honest laughter. Philosophy, he said, should make us both wise and happy, or it has failed. Voltaire's moral vision of the world rested upon one unshakable foundation: the dignity of human reason. He believed that the human mind, when freed from superstition and tyranny, could approach truth through honest inquiry. But this freedom required constant defense, for ignorance is patient and authority is seductive. He wrote that superstition, like a weed, returns whenever vigilance sleeps. The task of enlightenment is therefore endless: to think, to question, and to resist the return of darkness in new disguises. Voltaire understood that the enemies of reason often wear noble masks. They speak in the name of tradition, patriotism, or divine will. But beneath those words lies the same old hunger for power. He saw in religious persecution and political oppression the same logic: the desire to dominate the conscience of others. That, for him, was the greatest of crimes: the attempt to enslave the soul. His entire life was a rebellion against this tyranny of the mind. He believed that freedom of conscience is sacred: to believe or disbelieve, to doubt, to inquire. These are not privileges granted by the state or the church. They are natural rights of every thinking being. No power on earth, he said, can rightfully dictate what a person must believe. The only legitimate use of reason is persuasion, never coercion. A truth that must be enforced by law is not truth at all, but fear in disguise.
Voltaire's humanism extended beyond Europe. In an age of empire and slavery, he denounced the hypocrisy of nations that preached civilization while practicing oppression. He wrote against colonial cruelty and mocked the notion that conquest was a divine mission. To enslave a man, he said, is to deny reason itself, for it assumes that some minds are made to command and others to obey. He saw in slavery not only an economic crime but a philosophical one, the corruption of the very idea of humanity. He also understood the psychology of power. Those who rule unjustly, he observed, must surround themselves with illusions. They must convince themselves that their domination is necessary, that their victims are inferior, that their actions are sacred. This is how tyranny survives, through lies told first to others and then to oneself. Against this self-deception, Voltaire placed the mirror of satire. His wit stripped away the pomp of authority, revealing the absurdity beneath. To laugh at a tyrant, he believed, is to take away his magic. Yet Voltaire was not an anarchist. He knew that society requires order and law. What he demanded was rational order, government by consent, justice by evidence, faith without fanaticism. He sought a balance between liberty and stability, where reason moderates both passion and power. His goal was not the destruction of institutions, but their purification. Kings, priests, and judges could exist, but only as servants of reason, not masters of it. In private, Voltaire was often melancholy. He saw too clearly the persistence of ignorance and cruelty to believe in quick victories. He knew that progress is slow, fragile, and often thankless. Men will always be mad, and those who think can do no more than seek to render them less so. This realism gave his optimism its depth. He was not a dreamer, but a worker in the long field of history, tilling the soil of human thought so that later generations might plant in it. His ethics were therefore modest and practical. He urged people to cultivate honesty, curiosity, and kindness in their own lives. Instead of waiting for a perfect world, he said, improve your corner of it. Instead of arguing endlessly about metaphysics, feed the hungry, teach the ignorant, heal the sick, and fight injustice where you find it. The measure of wisdom is not how much one knows, but how well one acts. Voltaire also believed that laughter itself was a moral duty. To laugh is to affirm life in the face of absurdity. It is to refuse despair, to say, the world may be foolish, but I will not join its madness. His humor, though sharp, was never nihilistic. It was rooted in love, love of truth, of beauty, of the fragile, flawed humanity that persists despite its delusions. To laugh with Voltaire is not to mock life, but to defend it. Voltaire's battle for reason was ultimately a battle for humanity. He believed that ignorance, cruelty, and fanaticism are not external evils imposed upon us, but internal weaknesses cultivated through neglect. Every age, he said, must choose between the light of inquiry and the comfort of superstition. Most will choose comfort because thought demands courage. It demands that we doubt our teachers, our traditions, and even ourselves. But those who dare to think freely carry civilization forward, one thought at a time. He regarded philosophy not as a profession, but as a moral posture, a way of standing in the world. To be a philosopher, in his sense, was not to retreat into abstraction, but to live as if truth and justice mattered more than approval or fear. It was to confront ignorance with reason, to meet cruelty with irony, and to defend those who could not defend themselves. For Voltaire, the philosopher is not a priest of wisdom, but a servant of humanity. He saw reason as the most democratic of powers. It belongs to no one class or nation, no church or king. It is the birthright of every mind. Thus, enlightenment is not the privilege of scholars, it is the awakening of the common person to the dignity of thought. Education, he insisted, should therefore be universal, secular, and practical. It should teach people how to think, not what to think. A nation that fears education fears its own citizens, because knowledge is power in its purest form, the power to question.
Voltaire's critique of organized religion was often misunderstood as atheism, but he was not an atheist. He rejected superstition, not spirituality. He saw in the natural order evidence of a creator, but one far different from the jealous gods of Scripture. His God was reason itself, impartial, silent, and just. This deistic vision allowed him to preserve the moral beauty of faith without its violence. If God did not exist, he famously wrote, it would be necessary to invent him. Yet he added with equal force that the God invented by priests was often a monster in the image of their own ambitions. In Voltaire's view, religion should inspire virtue, not terror. True piety, he said, consists not in ritual, but in compassion. It is expressed in kindness to the living, not sacrifices to the unseen. He admired the teachings of simple morality found in many faiths, but despised their hierarchies of power. A good man, in his philosophy, needs no permission to do good. Conscience is his temple, and reason is his priest. Voltaire's relationship with suffering was complex. He had seen too much of it to idealize life. Yet he refused despair. The world, he said, may not be the best possible, but it is the only one we have, and within it we must create meaning. His realism was not cold, it was compassionate. He understood that life's imperfections are what make virtue necessary. Without injustice, there would be no courage. Without ignorance, no progress. Without pain, no compassion. He did not seek metaphysical consolation. The afterlife, if it exists, will take care of itself. What matters is the life we live now. Heaven, in his philosophy, is not a distant paradise, but a state of mind born of reason and goodwill. Hell is ignorance and hatred on earth. In this sense, Voltaire transformed morality from theology into human responsibility. Salvation is not received, it is built moment by moment through the use of intelligence in service of kindness. This emphasis on the present shaped his concept of happiness. He rejected both asceticism and hedonism. The wise person, he said, enjoys the pleasures of life without being enslaved by them. Moderation, humility, and gratitude are the ingredients of peace. To enjoy life is not a sin, it is an art. The pursuit of happiness, therefore, is the highest expression of reason, for only a mind free of fear can truly delight in existence. Voltaire's writings were not just theoretical, they were acts of rebellion. Every essay, letter, and satire he wrote chipped away at the walls of ignorance. He used the printing press as his sword and laughter as his shield. His pen moved faster than censorship could catch it. When his works were banned, they were spread in secret. When burned, they were recopied. Truth, he proved, can survive fire. His words became the underground current of the Enlightenment, whispering freedom into the minds of generations. In his later years, he withdrew to Ferney, where his home became a refuge for exiles, thinkers, and dreamers. There, he continued to write letters that connected him to every corner of Europe. His correspondence formed an invisible network of minds, a republic of reason without borders. He lived long enough to see the dawn of ideas he had sown, the growing power of science, the decline of clerical authority, and the first murmurs of human rights. Yet, even in triumph, he remained wary. Men are equal, he said, not because nature made them so, but because reason teaches them to recognize it. Equality, like freedom, must be learned and guarded. No revolution or law can guarantee it forever. Voltaire's warning was prophetic. The same passion for liberty that overthrows tyrants can, if guided by fanaticism, become tyrannical itself. That is why he valued moderation as the guardian of enlightenment. Voltaire's understanding of moderation was not weakness, but wisdom born of experience. He had seen revolutions of thought turn into dogmas of their own. Every new orthodoxy, no matter how enlightened at first, risks becoming a new tyranny once it claims to possess absolute truth. Therefore, he urged his readers to distrust not only kings and priests, but philosophers who speak like prophets. Doubt, he wrote, is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. To live wisely is to accept uncertainty without surrendering to confusion, to walk between skepticism and conviction, guided by reason but aware of its limits. He considered humility a philosophical virtue. The universe, vast and indifferent, dwarfs human pride. What we know, he said, is a drop. What we ignore, an ocean. To pretend otherwise is to invite folly. Yet he did not see this ignorance as despairing. It was liberating. Once we admit how little we know, we become kinder, more tolerant, more eager to learn. The proud mind demands agreement. The wise mind seeks understanding. Voltaire's cosmopolitan spirit reflected this humility. He saw himself as a citizen of the world, belonging to no single church or nation. For him, nationalism was another form of superstition, an idol that divided humanity into us and them. He believed that reason and sympathy transcended borders. The earth, he wrote, is but one country, and men are its citizens. This universalism was radical in his time, when Europe's powers justified conquest in the name of civilization. He answered them with irony. No people are truly civilized while they practice barbarity in distant lands.
He was fascinated by the diversity of cultures and religions. In Letters on England, he admired the English tolerance that allowed Catholics, Protestants, and even atheists to live side by side. In his philosophical dictionary, he studied Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Chinese philosophy with curiosity rather than contempt. He found wisdom and folly everywhere, but what interested him most was the shared moral core that transcended doctrine. Every culture, he said, contains the idea of justice and the aspiration to happiness. The differences that divide us are trivial beside the truths that unite us. Voltaire's literary style was inseparable from his philosophy. He wrote not to impress, but to awaken. His sentences were sharp, light, and precise, the literary equivalent of reason itself. He despised obscurity in thought as much as in prose. A philosopher who cannot be understood, he said, either does not understand himself or is hiding nonsense behind smoke. Clarity, for Voltaire, was a moral duty. To write clearly is to respect the reader. To obscure is to dominate. His humor was also a philosophical tool. He believed that irony could reach where argument could not. When you make a person laugh at a false idea, he will rarely return to it. Laughter breaks the spell of solemn stupidity. Through his wit, Voltaire made philosophy accessible. He brought it down from academic towers to the marketplace, the salon, the stage, and the street. He proved that truth, when dressed in humor, can travel faster than sermons. In his letters, Voltaire often returned to the image of the garden. It symbolized the moral work of life, limited, humble, yet meaningful. The world's evils may be vast, but each of us can cultivate a small plot of goodness. We cannot end war or abolish suffering, but we can reduce ignorance, heal wounds, comfort the broken, and sow tolerance. The garden is civilization itself, sustained not by grand declarations, but by daily labor. To cultivate one's garden is to practice wisdom with one's hands. Voltaire's political ideal was not democracy in the modern sense. He distrusted the passions of crowds as much as the arrogance of kings, but he laid the intellectual foundation for democratic thought. His insistence on liberty, justice, and education as universal rights would later fuel revolutions in both America and France. Though he did not live to see those upheavals, his words echoed in their declarations. The idea that reason should govern instead of lineage or dogma was his true revolution. He was also among the first to imagine a moral community based on dialogue rather than faith. Instead of temples and altars, he envisioned academies, theaters, and newspapers, places where minds could meet as equals. Conversation, he believed, was sacred because it required both speech and listening. A society that talks freely is a society that thinks freely. Silence, by contrast, is the ally of tyranny. His empathy was not limited to humankind. He saw in cruelty toward animals the same arrogance that drives cruelty among men. He condemned the idea that reason gives humans the right to torture other beings. True enlightenment, he suggested, recognizes that compassion must extend to all creatures capable of suffering. In this sense, his philosophy anticipated modern humanism, an ethics grounded not in divine command, but in shared vulnerability. His final years were marked by both triumph and fatigue. The Enlightenment had become a force across Europe, yet he knew the battle was not over. Superstition adapts, tyranny evolves, and ignorance never dies. Still, he took comfort in knowing that ideas, once born, cannot be buried forever. His writings had planted seeds that would outlive him. If there were no God, he had said, it would be necessary to invent one. So too, if there were no Voltaire, the spirit of liberty might have had to invent him. In his final years, Voltaire stood as a symbol, not merely a writer, but the living embodiment of thought in rebellion. He had spent his life confronting the ignorance of priests, the cruelty of kings, and the cowardice of society. And now, near the end, the world came to him. Visitors traveled from across Europe to Ferney to see the old philosopher who had fought the church with a pen and won. His house became a sanctuary of freedom, filled with laughter, discussion, and debate. The powerful once tried to silence him, now they sought his approval. Yet Voltaire, ever ironic, received their praise with amusement. He knew that flattery was just another form of hypocrisy. He wrote to a friend, "When I die, I hope to go neither to heaven nor to hell, but to a place where wise men discuss truth freely." That was his faith, not in salvation, but in conversation. He believed that eternity, if it exists, must resemble an endless exchange of ideas, where no authority rules and every mind shines with curiosity. For Voltaire, heaven was simply the triumph of reason over fear.
As he aged, pain and illness tormented him, but his wit remained unbroken. He joked that the only thing he feared was dying before correcting the last edition of his works. Behind the humor, however, was serenity. He had long since made peace with mortality. "Death," he wrote, "is neither good nor evil. It is merely the return to nature. What matters is how one lives, whether one leaves behind light or darkness. The philosopher's duty is not to escape death, but to illuminate life." His last journey to Paris in 1778 was both a homecoming and a victory parade. Crowds filled the streets, shouting his name. Actors, scholars, and nobles bowed before him. The city that once banned his books now celebrated him as its conscience. The applause moved him deeply, though he laughed at the irony of being adored by the same world that once persecuted him. "When one is right too early," he said, "one is called mad." Now, at last, the age had caught up with him. Yet Voltaire did not mistake applause for progress. He knew that admiration could be shallow, that society often praises those it does not understand. The struggle against fanaticism was far from over. "It is forbidden," he warned, "to kill. Therefore all murderers are punished unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets." That single line captured his moral genius, the power to expose cruelty hiding behind glory. His laughter, even at the end, was a form of justice. When he died, the church denied him burial in consecrated ground.
He was buried in secret by friends who knew that the earth of France itself was more sacred than any church that had condemned him. Years later, during the Revolution, his remains were moved to the Pantheon, carried through the streets of Paris by a vast procession. Above his tomb they inscribed, "He gave the human mind a great freedom." It was the only epitaph he ever needed. Voltaire's philosophy, distilled through his life and words, remains a manifesto for the modern mind. It is the refusal to accept authority without evidence, to endure cruelty without protest, to live in ignorance without inquiry. It teaches that truth belongs to no single people or creed, that laughter can be holier than prayer, and that the greatest act of worship is to think. His legacy lies not in any single doctrine, but in a spirit, a restless, questioning energy that will not bow to dogma. He transformed doubt from a sin into a virtue, showing that uncertainty is not weakness, but the beginning of wisdom. He replaced faith in revelation with faith in reason, and faith in reason with compassion for those still learning to use it. His true disciples are not those who repeat his words, but those who continue his struggle against ignorance in whatever form it takes. Voltaire's influence radiated beyond his century. His ideas shaped the Declaration of the Rights of Man, inspired revolutions of thought and politics, and laid the groundwork for secular democracy. Even today, whenever freedom of speech is defended, whenever superstition is mocked by truth, whenever cruelty is met with laughter, Voltaire's spirit speaks. He does not rest in stone monuments, but in the courage of those who think for themselves. He taught that the universe may not care for justice, but humanity can. That God, if he exists, may remain silent, but reason must not. That we may never know ultimate truth, but we can reduce suffering, increase understanding, and make the world slightly less absurd. In this, Voltaire found his purpose, to replace divine perfection with human decency. The essence of his wisdom can be summarized in a single line from Candide. We must cultivate our garden. It is both command and consolation. We cannot remake the world, but we can tend to our part of it, improve, enlighten, and nurture what lies within our reach. Each act of kindness, each discovery, each truth spoken in defiance of lies is a seed in that eternal garden. And so, the philosophy of Voltaire ends not with triumph, but with work. The fight against ignorance is endless, but so too is the capacity for reason. The sun of enlightenment may set in one age and rise in another, yet as long as a single person refuses to kneel before falsehood, Voltaire lives. His laughter, his clarity, and his courage continue to echo, reminding the world that thought itself is the highest form of rebellion.
Voltaire's contempt for metaphysical arrogance was relentless. He saw on the grand systems of philosophers a kind of vanity disguised as wisdom. Those who claimed to know the purpose of existence, he believed, were only dressing ignorance in the robes of certainty. Doubt, he once said, is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. He preferred the humble question to the proud answer. For Voltaire, true intelligence begins with admitting how little one knows. The greatest crime against truth is not ignorance itself, but the illusion of knowledge. He rejected blind metaphysics and scholastic dogma because they suffocate curiosity and replace discovery with obedience. He sought clarity over mystery, evidence over faith, and skepticism over submission. Yet his skepticism was not nihilistic. He doubted not to destroy, but to liberate. By questioning the false, he made room for the true. His method was surgical. He cut through superstition with wit, not hatred. He believed humor could heal the mind from fanaticism more effectively than anger. When faced with fanaticism, he did not scream, he laughed, for laughter disarms tyranny by exposing its absurdity. He understood that power feeds on solemnity, ridicule robs it of reverence. Voltaire's fight for tolerance was not abstract.
He defended real victims of injustice, people condemned for heresy, accused of witchcraft or persecuted for their religion. The Colosse affair, where a Protestant man was tortured to death by Catholic authorities, became one of his defining crusades. Voltaire used his pen to awaken conscience across Europe. His writings demanded not vengeance, but justice and reform. He transformed outrage into moral force. His activism was the birth of intellectual resistance. He proved that the writer could challenge kings and priests alike with nothing but truth and courage. The word philosopher, in his time, ceased to mean merely a thinker. It came to mean one who fights for reason against cruelty. In politics, Voltaire was neither a revolutionary nor a reactionary. He distrusted both the tyranny of kings and the madness of mobs. He saw that freedom without order becomes chaos, and order without freedom becomes slavery. His ideal was enlightened monarchy, rule guided by reason, restraint, and compassion. He admired the British model of constitutional monarchy, where laws, not divine authority, governed men. He believed liberty must be protected by institutions, not by sentiment alone. Yet he also knew that no government is just by nature. It must be constantly questioned, reformed, and reminded that power belongs to the people. His politics were pragmatic, grounded in experience rather than theory. He believed good governance is not born of ideology, but of decency, competence, and restraint. Voltaire's deism was equally pragmatic. He rejected organized religion, but not the idea of a higher intelligence. The universe, to him, revealed order and design, but not dogma. The God he envisioned was not the jealous deity of Scripture, but a silent architect, neither demanding worship nor delivering miracles. Religion, he said, should teach morality, not terror. He detested the hypocrisy of priests who preached love while burning heretics. His God was a symbol of cosmic reason, not divine punishment. To believe in such a being was not an act of submission, but of gratitude for existence itself. Yet he warned that even the concept of God must remain under the authority of reason. If belief becomes an excuse for cruelty, it must be rejected. Voltaire's moral philosophy centered on compassion, guided by reason. He understood that men are not angels, and moral progress depends not on eradicating vice, but on limiting its harm. To expect perfection from humanity is to invite tyranny, for tyrants always claim they can perfect others by force. Voltaire's ethic was modest yet radical: reduce suffering wherever possible. He saw happiness as the only universal goal, and tolerance as its necessary condition. I wish to be happy in this world, and I see that it depends on being good. His morality was simple: do not harm, do not impose, and do not claim divine sanction for cruelty. For Voltaire, evil often came not from wicked intent, but from ignorance. The fanatic, the censor, the tyrant, all are certain they are right. The task of philosophy, then, is not to eradicate evil directly, but to educate against it. Enlightenment is a moral duty. To think clearly is to act justly, for confusion breeds oppression. He saw education as the only true revolution. Once people can read, think, and question, no priest or ruler can enslave them again. Thus he fought for the spread of knowledge, printing, and free debate. His greatest weapon was the book, his battlefield, the mind.
Voltaire's attitude towards suffering reveals his realism. He saw that life is filled with pain, but he refused to romanticize it. After the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, which killed thousands, he rejected the optimistic philosophy that claimed all is for the best. To him, such ideas were an insult to human misery. He insisted that no metaphysical justification can excuse suffering. Evil is not a test or a lesson, it is a fact of existence that must be faced and lessened. His answer was not resignation, but action. We must cultivate our garden became his final metaphor for responsibility. It means to focus on what one can improve, to work, to learn, to care for one's community, and to use reason where faith and fate fail. The heart of Voltaire's philosophy is therefore moral realism. He believed that truth without compassion is cruelty, and compassion without truth is blindness. Civilization depends on the balance of both. He fought superstition not merely because it was false, but because it made men cruel. He fought censorship not only because it silenced ideas, but because it degraded humanity. He fought tyranny because it corrupted both rulers and subjects. His ethics were built on empathy as a natural instinct, not a religious duty. The ability to feel another's suffering, he believed, is proof enough that morality does not need revelation, it only needs awareness. Voltaire's legacy endures because his thought is inseparable from courage. He risked imprisonment, exile, and the wrath of both church and crown. His weapon was irony, his armor, intellect, his cause, humanity. He mocked kings, challenged priests, and exposed philosophers who mistook abstraction for truth. He turned ridicule into a moral force. His philosophy lives wherever laughter is used to defend freedom, wherever wit is used to unmask hypocrisy. His final wisdom was humility before truth and perseverance in reason. The world, he knew, will always swing between enlightenment and ignorance, freedom and fanaticism. The task of the thinker is not to end the struggle, but to continue it. To cultivate one's garden is to never stop weeding falsehood, planting thought, and watering kindness. In this endless labor, he saw the true dignity of man, not in ruling, preaching, or conquering, but in thinking, doubting, and doing good. Thus ends not a doctrine, but a call to vigilance, laughter, and courage in the face of stupidity and power. Voltaire's philosophy remains humanity's mirror, reminding each generation that the first act of freedom is to think. Voltaire's war against hypocrisy was lifelong, for he believed hypocrisy was the most dangerous of all vices. The hypocrite cloaks evil in virtue, injustice in piety, and selfishness in devotion. To him, hypocrisy was the disease of civilization, the mask that allowed barbarism to hide behind morality. He exposed it in priests who blessed executions, kings who preached mercy while enslaving nations, and philosophers who spoke of equality while exploiting the poor. He knew that humanity would never be free until it learned to see through masks. The first duty of reason, he said, is to unmask lies disguised as truth. The moment a lie is revealed, its power dies, for power feeds on illusion. To live honestly is to strip away illusion and face reality without fear. He despised cruelty above all things. No doctrine, however sacred, can justify the torment of a single innocent being. In this he was uncompromising. It is better to risk saving a guilty man than to condemn an innocent one. This simple line condensed his entire moral code. It was a protest against every inquisition, every execution, every ideology that claims to serve the greater good through violence. For Voltaire, no cause that demands blood is just. Justice without mercy is not justice, but revenge. He saw that cruelty is always born of certainty, of men convinced that they alone possess the truth. Therefore, he made doubt a moral virtue. To doubt is to be humane. To be certain is to be dangerous. Voltaire's humor was not mere entertainment, it was a form of wisdom. Through satire, he achieved what sermons could not. He made people think by making them laugh. His wit was a mirror polished to reflect the absurdity of power. He believed that laughter frees the mind by breaking the spell of fear. Tyrants rely on solemnity, institutions rely on ritual, but both collapse when ridiculed. Voltaire's laughter was rebellion in its purest form, a non-violent intellectual revolt. His jokes carried more moral force than 1,000 decrees. By mocking the sacred, he made it human again, stripping fear from faith and reverence from oppression. Humor, he said, is a weapon for those who cannot wield swords.
Voltaire's relationship with truth was dynamic. He knew truth is not a treasure buried waiting to be found, but a light that must be kept burning through inquiry.
He mistrusted those who claimed to possess absolute truth, for possession kills curiosity. He preferred the seeker to the prophet, the skeptic to the priest. His understanding of truth was elastic. It grows with discovery, it changes with knowledge, and it demands constant defense against error. He saw science not as an enemy of faith, but as its purification, replacing superstition with understanding. The telescope and the microscope, he said, reveal more of God's grandeur than 1,000 sermons. Yet he was careful not to deify science itself, for he knew that even reason can become a dogma when worshipped blindly. The key is balance, to use reason without arrogance, to believe without surrendering judgment. He detested the idea that authority is a source of truth. To Voltaire, authority must always justify itself before reason, never the reverse. Kings, popes, philosophers, all are fallible. The mind, he said, owes obedience to evidence, not to rank. He fought against the notion that tradition makes something right simply because it has endured. Time does not sanctify error. Repetition does not transform lies into wisdom. Every idea, no matter how ancient, must earn its place through reason and humanity. He viewed history as a vast theater of mistakes, and philosophy as the art of learning from them. The past is to be studied, not worshipped. His defense of individuality was revolutionary. Voltaire believed the highest good is not conformity, but autonomy, the right to think and live according to one's conscience. He warned that societies built on obedience produce mediocrity, while societies that allow dissent produce greatness. True progress, he said, is measured not by wealth or conquest, but by how freely people may speak their minds. The freedom to err is as sacred as the freedom to be right. Censorship to him was worse than ignorance, because it murdered potential thought before it was born. He fought against it with the ferocity of one who understood that every silenced word is a stolen piece of human dignity. Voltaire's philosophy of education reflected this belief. He wanted children to learn how to think, not what to think. The purpose of education, he argued, is not to fill the mind with facts, but to awaken the capacity for reason. A well-educated person is not one who recites truths, but one who questions them. He criticized institutions that replaced curiosity with catechism and obedience with fear. To educate is to liberate the mind from prejudice. A mind that can think freely is a mind that cannot be enslaved. He believed that ignorance was the root of all oppression. Thus, the teacher was the truest revolutionary. Voltaire's reflections on happiness were subtle. He rejected both the ascetic's rejection of pleasure and the hedonist's worship of it. Happiness, he said, lies in moderation and purpose. It is not found in wealth or luxury, but in the harmony of mind and body, thought and action. The happy man is one who works, learns, and contributes to others. He called this the cultivation of one's garden, the act of turning labor into meaning. For Voltaire, happiness is not given by fate, but built through effort. It grows out of reason, friendship, and decency. To demand eternal happiness is foolish. To build moments of peace within a turbulent world is wise. He saw progress not as inevitable, but as fragile. Civilization can advance, but it can also regress. Every age of reason is followed by an age of superstition if vigilance is lost. Thus, enlightenment is not a destination, but a continuous struggle. The enemies of reason, fear, greed, ignorance, never die. They only change shape. The duty of each generation is to resist them anew. Voltaire saw himself as part of this endless battle, a soldier armed with irony, not violence. His war was against darkness, and his victory was temporary by design.
for the light must always be rekindled. He recognized the limits of reason as well. Rationality alone cannot satisfy the heart. Man needs beauty, imagination, and hope. He admired art for its power to humanize intellect and soften judgment. Poetry, music, and theater, he said, teach empathy more effectively than logic. The soul, though invisible, is real in the way it feels joy and sorrow. Voltaire never denied emotion. He sought to guide it through reason, not suppress it. The wise man feels deeply, but is not enslaved by feeling. Emotion gives color to life. Reason gives it shape.
His reflections on mortality are among his most poignant. Death, he said, is the only certainty, yet it is the least understood. Philosophers who pretend not to fear it are liars. Those who obsess over it are fools. The proper attitude is acceptance. Life is brief, but its brevity gives it value. The purpose of life is not to escape death, but to make life worth dying for. To live well is to live consciously, to understand, to love, to create, to leave behind a world slightly more reasonable than one found it. Eternity, for Voltaire, exists not in heaven, but in memory, in the lasting influence of good deeds and ideas. Voltaire's humanism rests on the conviction that the dignity of man lies in his ability to think, to choose, and to feel compassion. He refused to see humanity as fallen or damned. Man is imperfect, but capable of greatness through reason and kindness. He believed progress depends not on divine intervention, but on human cooperation. Each small act of understanding pushes civilization forward. Each refusal to hate preserves it. Evil may always exist, but so will conscience. That balance is what keeps humanity alive. He viewed civilization as an ongoing moral experiment, a fragile achievement sustained by thought, empathy, and laughter. His optimism was not naive, it was defiant. He knew the world is cruel, but believed it can be made less cruel. To doubt, to question, to laugh, and to love, these are the weapons of enlightenment. Voltaire's entire life was a demonstration of this creed. He turned the pen into a sword, and irony into armor. He fought with ideas and left behind an inheritance of freedom. His final vision of humanity was humble. "We are small," he said, "but not insignificant. Our task is not to comprehend the infinite, but to improve the finite. To reason, to learn, to forgive, and to cultivate our garden, these are the true acts of greatness. Everything else is vanity." Voltaire's fight was not only against dogma, but against despair, against the temptation to accept the absurdities of life as justification for inaction. He mocked not to destroy, but to awaken. His laughter was his sword, his irony his armor. He saw clearly that oppression survives not because it is strong, but because the majority prefers silence to discomfort. He declared that to think freely was a duty, not a luxury. He ridiculed superstition because he knew that it enslaves the soul before it enslaves the body. For Voltaire, liberty began in the mind, the refusal to let others dictate what one must believe. His pen moved faster than his enemies' swords because he wrote not only for the intellect, but for the courage of humanity. He made reason charming, rebellion witty, and enlightenment contagious. His universe was one where justice required constant noise, where the thinker must disturb the tyrant, the priest, and the complacent. His vision was not utopian, but defiant, a recognition that perfection is impossible, but improvement is always within reach. He distrusted systems, for every system becomes a cage once worshipped. He preferred doubt to dogma, movement to stagnation, laughter to solemnity. In doubt, he saw strength,
because only doubt allows progress. He believed that those who never question live as slaves of those who pretend to know. His war on fanaticism was a war on the human tendency to claim absolute truth. He saw history as a cycle of reason rising and falling, each time challenged by ignorance disguised as faith or ideology. He taught that the enlightened man must not retreat into solitude, but use his reason to better the world. His message: think, act, and above all, never obey blindly. Voltaire's philosophy was not built on metaphysics, but on ethics. He rejected the idea that suffering is divine justice. For him, to justify suffering itself was a sin. His heart burned against cruelty in all its forms: religious persecution, slavery, torture, censorship, and hypocrisy. He understood that civilization measures itself not by monuments or wealth, but by its compassion and capacity for thought. He did not believe in man's inherent goodness, but in his potential to become better through reason and tolerance. His optimism was pragmatic. He did not hope for paradise. He cultivated the garden. He turned philosophy into a manual for survival in a world governed by absurdity and power. Voltaire's irony was sharper than hate because it exposed the ridiculousness of evil rather than glorifying it. He believed that laughter is the weapon of the wise, for when one can laugh at the tyrant's power weakens. To him, humor was not a distraction, but a rebellion. It refused to take sacred lies seriously. It restored dignity to the oppressed by showing that fear can be mocked. His defense of freedom of speech was absolute because he understood that silence is complicity. "I disapprove of what you say," he wrote in spirit if not in words, "but I will defend to the death your right to say it." For Voltaire, truth had no owner and reason no church.
He despised both the dogmatism of religion and the arrogance of philosophers who replace God with their own systems. He saw that knowledge can become tyranny if it ceases to question itself. Thus, the true philosopher must be humble before the unknown. He found no ultimate answer to existence, only the duty to make existence more bearable, more intelligent, more just. He turned philosophy away from cosmic speculation toward human responsibility. His legacy is not a doctrine, but an attitude. Skepticism combined with compassion, wit combined with wisdom, rebellion combined with decency. Voltaire's thought lives wherever someone refuses to stay silent in the face of injustice, wherever laughter breaks the chains of fear, wherever light is chosen over ignorance. His call still echoes through centuries. Use your mind, cherish your liberty, and never allow cruelty to wear the mask of virtue. Voltaire's greatest strength was his understanding that power fears ridicule more than revolt. A despot can face armies, but he cannot withstand being laughed at. That is why Voltaire's satire was revolutionary. It dismantled the illusion of authority. He mocked kings not to destroy monarchy itself, but to strip it of its sanctity. He mocked priests not to erase faith, but to expose corruption disguised as holiness. He mocked philosophers when they grew too proud of their own theories, reminding them that reason without humility becomes another superstition. He did not seek destruction, but cleansing, and intellectual purification. Voltaire believed that once the false grandeur of tyranny is revealed as absurd, people regain the courage to think for themselves, and that is when freedom begins. His skepticism was not cynicism. He distrusted human institutions, but never gave up on human reason. He believed in progress, not as a straight path, but as a struggle against ignorance renewed in every generation. The Enlightenment, for him, was not a historical period, but a permanent task. He warned that fanaticism would always return under new disguises: political ideologies, moral crusades, or blind nationalism. To him, enlightenment meant constant vigilance. He saw that evil thrives when the intelligent remain silent. So he demanded that writers, thinkers, and citizens speak, even at risk. He knew that truth is rarely safe, but it is always necessary. His letters, pamphlets, and satires were weapons sharper than swords because they attacked the roots of oppression, fear, and falsehood. Voltaire's fight was not for abstract humanity, but for concrete individuals suffering under unjust systems. When he defended Calas, the Protestant wrongly executed by Catholic authorities, he turned a personal tragedy into a universal cry for justice. He did not just argue, he acted, using reason as a form of resistance. He taught that one must never accept cruelty as inevitable, nor injustice as fate. In his vision, the philosopher must not only observe the world, but also repair it. His ethics were built on sympathy, the ability to feel the pain of others. That, for Voltaire, was the foundation of morality, not theology. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him, he wrote, not to defend religion, but to affirm the moral need for order and meaning. Yet he insisted that if such a God exists, he must be just and reasonable, not the cruel deity of fanatic minds. Voltaire's God was the God of nature, silent, logical, and free from human absurdities. He accepted divine mystery, but rejected divine tyranny. His deism was an act of rebellion against both atheism's void and religion's chains. He refused extremes because he understood their similarity. Both imprison the mind in certainty. The wise man, he said, neither kneels nor denies. He observes, doubts, and acts with integrity.
And every age would need voices like his, ironic, rational, fearless, to expose hypocrisy. Voltaire did not trust revolutions because he understood that those who claim to save the world often become its new oppressors. He trusted instead the slow revolution of the mind, the gradual enlightenment of people who learn to think critically. His dream was not of conquest, but of cultivation, the mind as a garden, reason as its gardener, and ignorance as the weed that must be uprooted again and again. Voltaire's defiance was not born of hatred, but of love for clarity, sanity, and freedom. He knew that the chains of the mind are stronger than the chains of iron. Once people accept lies as truth, they no longer need to be imprisoned. They will police themselves. That is why he wrote endlessly, tirelessly, with wit that pierced illusions. He believed that laughter could liberate because it reveals the ridiculousness of tyranny and superstition. A man who can laugh at his rulers is already half free. His irony was the weapon of the powerless, transforming weakness into intelligence. Voltaire understood that ideas move the world more deeply than armies, for armies destroy bodies, while ideas free or enslave souls. Thus, his battlefields were salons, letters, pamphlets, plays, each sentence a spark in the dark corners of oppression. He saw censorship as the first step toward barbarism. To silence a thinker is to declare war on the future. He warned that the most dangerous tyranny is the one that disguises itself as moral protection. Beware, he would say in spirit, of those who claim to save you by limiting your thought. For him, the only salvation lay in inquiry. He believed that truth emerges not from authority, but from confrontation, the clash of opinions, the friction of reason. That is why he cherished debate, even with his enemies. He knew that the enemy who forces you to think is more useful than the friend who echoes your ignorance. His life itself was proof of his principles. Exiled, censored, attacked, he never abandoned his pen. Every attempt to silence him only multiplied his influence. He turned persecution into prestige, insult into energy. Voltaire was not merely a philosopher, he was a storm of intellect that refused to rest. Even in wealth and fame he mocked vanity, for he knew that comfort dulls the mind. He kept himself sharp through outrage, an outrage rooted in compassion. His laughter was never detached.
It was the laughter of one who cares too much to stay silent. He saw suffering as the ultimate test of reason. When the Lisbon earthquake killed thousands, he refused to accept that it was divine punishment. He called it what it was, tragedy, and demanded that men respond not with prayer, but with progress. Build stronger houses, better systems, kinder societies. Don't ask why it happened, ask how to prevent it. That was Voltaire's spirit, practical, lucid, courageous. He wanted a world where philosophy is not a retreat from life, but a guide for living. He taught that enlightenment without empathy becomes cold, and empathy without reason becomes blind. Only their union creates justice. His call to cultivate your garden was not a retreat from society, it was a metaphor for responsibility. The world is chaotic, but one can bring order to a part of it through action, patience, and care. Every person, he believed, must tend to their portion of humanity, educate, help, question, create. The collective garden of reason grows through these small acts. Voltaire distrusted those who sought to dominate others in the name of truth. He saw that every ideology becomes a new tyranny once it demands obedience. Thus, he stayed loyal not to doctrines, but to principles, liberty, tolerance, and the relentless pursuit of reason. He did not preach purity. He celebrated imperfection honestly lived. He preferred an imperfect truth to a perfect lie. To him, wisdom was not found in knowing everything, but in recognizing how little one knows. He rejected both the arrogance of faith and the arrogance of despair. His enlightenment was a dance between laughter and logic, between rebellion and moderation. He believed the true greatness lies not in conquest, but in the ability to remain free in thought and spirit, even under oppression. And perhaps that is why his ideas still resonate. They speak to the eternal struggle between fear and reason, ignorance and light, submission and freedom.
Voltaire's philosophy reached its summit in his defense of reason as the only true revolution. For him, reason was not cold calculation, but the flame that warms civilization and protects it from darkness. It was not an enemy of feeling, but its guide. He saw that ignorance multiplies when men let passion replace judgment. The fanatic and the tyrant are twins, one blinded by belief, the other by ambition, and both thrive where reason sleeps. He called for an awakening of minds, not through force, but through education. Teach people to think, and no tyrant can last. He envisioned schools not as temples of authority, but as laboratories of curiosity. Knowledge, for him, was the antidote to cruelty. Every superstition destroyed, every prejudice dismantled, was a step toward human dignity. His faith in progress was not naive, it was rebellious. He knew men were flawed, but he also knew that light is stronger than shadow. Every century, he said, adds a brick to the temple of reason, though the builders often work in darkness. He himself was one of those builders, carving clarity out of chaos. He made philosophy speak the language of the people. He turned enlightenment from a scholar's secret into a public fire. His pen made kings uneasy and citizens alert. Voltaire's fight was not abstract, it was deeply human. He hated cruelty in all forms, the executioner's rope, the judge's corruption, the priest's curse, the mob's rage. He taught that injustice, even when wrapped in law, remains evil. To obey unjust authority is to become its accomplice. His cry, "Écrase l'infâme," meaning crush the infamous thing, was not aimed at faith itself, but at fanaticism, at every system that tortures thought. He saw that tyranny always claims to act for the good of all. He replied, "There is no good that requires chains, no truth that needs a dungeon." His philosophy was a declaration of independence for the human mind. Voltaire also understood that the pursuit of happiness must replace the worship of suffering. He rejected the glorification of misery taught by certain moralists. He saw no virtue in pain for its own sake. To him, joy was not sin, but a sign of wisdom. the mark of one who knows how to live well despite absurdity. Pleasure, moderation, laughter, art, these were sacred acts of resistance against despair. To smile in a cruel world was itself a victory. He believed that beauty educates the soul more deeply than sermons. Music, literature, and theater were his temples, where the divine spark of reason and emotion meet. Through culture, he said, humanity remembers its own dignity. He lived by the principle that to improve the world, one must first refuse to hate it. He was not blind to evil, but he refused to let it poison his spirit. He mocked injustice without becoming bitter, proving that the free mind can stay light even when the world grows heavy. His humor was moral armor, his irony a way to stay sane amid madness. He turned suffering into satire, persecution into power. And in doing so, he created a model for all who wish to fight tyranny without becoming tyrannical themselves. Voltaire believed that enlightenment is never finished. Every victory of reason must be defended again, for ignorance is immortal in its disguises. He warned that progress breeds comfort, and comfort breeds forgetfulness. Once people stop questioning, the darkness returns. Thus, the true philosopher must always remain awake, suspicious of easy truths and noble lies. To think, for Voltaire, was an act of courage, to laugh an act of faith, to doubt an act of love. His legacy is not a system of thought, but a posture of the mind, curious, critical, compassionate. He left no commandments, only challenges. Think for yourself, fight for others, and never let the flame of reason die. Voltaire's wisdom matured into a philosophy of endurance, the art of surviving madness without surrendering to it. He understood that the world is not built on fairness, and yet man must act as if it could be. That tension between what is and what should be became the heartbeat of his thought. He saw that to demand perfection is to invite despair, but to accept corruption is to betray reason. Therefore, one must live between resignation and rebellion, lucid, awake, and ironic. He rejected the false comforts of both optimism and pessimism. Optimists excuse evil by calling it divine necessity. Pessimists justify inaction by calling it inevitable. Voltaire's solution was to act without illusion, improve what can be improved, expose what must be exposed, endure what cannot be changed. That is the meaning behind his call to cultivate our garden. It is not retreat, but resistance, an affirmation that creation, however small, is the answer to chaos. Each act of reason, each honest word, each gesture of kindness is a seed planted against the wilderness of ignorance. Voltaire believed that if every person tended their part of the world with conscience, the sum of those gardens would form civilization itself.
He distrusted revolutions that promised paradise through violence. He knew that blood breeds more chains. The true revolution, he said, happens in the mind, when the individual stops worshiping authority and begins thinking freely. A nation of thinkers needs no tyrant, for it governs itself through reason. Voltaire's humanism was not sentimental, but disciplined. He defended compassion not as emotion, but as duty, born from intelligence. To understand another's suffering is to acknowledge one's own humanity. For him, empathy and reason were two halves of the same light. The mind sees truth, the heart gives it meaning. He warned that reason without compassion becomes cruelty in disguise, while compassion without reason becomes chaos. Civilization survives only when both walk together. His tolerance was active, not passive, a demand to coexist without submission. We are all weak, he said, inconsistent, subject to error. Let us pardon each other's follies. That is the first law of nature. He saw that intolerance begins with certainty. the belief that one possesses the only truth. Against this, he raised the banner of doubt, not as weakness, but as virtue. To doubt is to respect reality. To question is to honor the mind. He argued that the most sacred right of man is the right to be wrong. The freedom to err is the foundation of all progress. Without it, there is only obedience and fear. Voltaire's enemies accused him of cynicism, but he was not a destroyer. He was a reformer armed with laughter. He sought to rescue the divine from the priests, morality from the moralists, and freedom from the rulers who claimed to protect it. He believed that good ideas must be dangerous, otherwise they are useless. His pen became the conscience of Europe because it never bowed, never softened. Even when old and sick, he continued to write against tyranny and superstition. He died still fighting, still laughing, still teaching that light can be reborn through courage. His last triumph was symbolic. When he returned to Paris after decades of exile, the city greeted him like a prophet of reason. The same establishment that once censored him now honored him. His ideas had outlived his persecutors. That, for Voltaire, was the final proof that thought is immortal. Empires crumble, kings fall, priests fade, but a single sentence of truth endures longer than all their monuments. He became not merely a philosopher, but a force of history, the voice that turned skepticism into hope. His life showed that one can fight the world and still love it, mock power and still serve humanity, doubt everything and still believe in reason. In his laughter, there was mercy. In his anger, justice. In his doubt, faith in the human mind. Voltaire's legacy is eternal vigilance, the refusal to let ignorance speak louder than intelligence. His philosophy remains a mirror in which every age must see itself and ask, do we still deserve the freedom he fought for?
His wit made him enemies among the powerful, but it made him eternal among the thinkers. He knew that to enlighten even one person is to alter the future. He never waited for humanity to be ready for reason. He provoked it into readiness. His method was disarmingly simple. Mock lies until they collapse under their own absurdity. Voltaire's laughter was an act of purification. It cleared the air of pompous nonsense. It made the truth breathable again. He turned satire into moral surgery, cutting away superstition and vanity with elegance and precision. His weapon was not violence, but clarity. He said that the pen, used well, is mightier not because it kills, but because it unveils. The tyrant's fear is not death, it is exposure. To be seen as ridiculous is to lose the spell of authority. And so Voltaire made kings blush and priests stammer with nothing but words. He reduced fear to a comedy, and in that comedy, men found courage. His call to cultivate your garden is therefore the culmination of his entire philosophy. It means take responsibility for the world within your reach. Do not wait for perfection. Begin with what you can improve. Reason, kindness, and humor are the tools of cultivation. The world is absurd, yes, but that does not absolve us. It challenges us to bring order, beauty, and justice into it. Every honest action, every free thought, every refusal to hate is a seed of light. Voltaire believed that these small seeds are stronger than armies because they regenerate endlessly. A single enlightened mind, he said, can illuminate centuries. That is his faith, not in gods or dogmas, but in the resilience of reason. He left us no commandments, only a practice. Think, laugh, and act. Think to see through lies. Laugh to stay human. Act to make the world less cruel. Voltaire's garden is everywhere a free mind dares to grow.
Voltaire's spirit endures wherever defiance and reason coexist. In classrooms that teach questioning over memorization, in writers who mock hypocrisy with elegance, in citizens who resist propaganda with laughter instead of violence. His legacy is not a relic, but a rhythm, the constant pulse of free thought breaking through conformity. He proved that the mind's rebellion is the beginning of all justice. For him, truth was not something to be worshipped, but something to be pursued, again and again, through error and correction. He believed that civilization is a fragile bridge built over barbarism, and that its only support beams are reason and tolerance. Remove either, and the bridge collapses into the chaos of fanaticism. He saw this clearly. Man's greatest enemy is not evil, but certainty. Every atrocity, every persecution, every war for moral purity begins with someone who believes too much. Voltaire's laughter, cutting through centuries, is a reminder that doubt is not destruction, it is defense. He taught that laughter keeps the intellect flexible, prevents pride from ossifying into ideology. To laugh is to breathe freely in a suffocating world. His laughter did not come from cruelty, but from compassion. It mocked stupidity because stupidity harms. He laughed to protect humanity from its own delusions. In that sense, he was both surgeon and comedian, cutting deep while keeping the patient alive. He was hated precisely because he made truth entertaining and danger delightful. His genius was to disguise revolution as wit. Through his mockery of kings and priests, he taught the masses how to think without fear. He turned ridicule into education, irony into rebellion. Voltaire's humor was reason wearing a smile, and behind that smile was a demand: live awake. He believed that knowledge without conscience was as dangerous as faith without doubt. He wanted men to be both clever and humane. He warned that intellect, when divorced from empathy, becomes cold machinery. The true philosopher, he said, must use reason not only to analyze the world, but to improve it. His ethics were built not on divine command, but on human dignity. To be human, for Voltaire, was to understand suffering and to reduce it wherever possible. No miracle, no ideology, no metaphysical consolation could justify cruelty. He rejected the notion that evil is necessary for good. Such reasoning, he said, is the coward's excuse for inaction. Instead, he offered an ethic of responsibility. The only justification for life is to make it less painful for others. That belief gave birth to modern humanism. He saw that morality does not need heaven. It only needs heart and reason.
The just man acts rightly, not because he fears hell or hopes for paradise, but because he understands that justice preserves the harmony of existence. He insisted that morality rooted in reason is more stable than morality rooted in faith. Faith divides, reason unites. Faith demands obedience, reason demands dialogue. In that dialogue, civilization grows. Voltaire's dream was of a humanity mature enough to govern itself through logic and compassion, without priests or tyrants as intermediaries. He never lived to see such a world, but his laughter planted the seeds of it. He knew that progress is slow and fragile, a candle flame flickering in a storm. Yet he also knew that once lit, it can never be fully extinguished. Each generation must protect it anew. That is the meaning of his final command: cultivate your garden. It means defend your mind, nurture your reason, improve your corner of the world. Don't wait for gods, kings, or philosophers to save you. Save yourself by thinking, by questioning, by creating. The garden is your soul, your work, your responsibility. In tending it, you resist chaos. You make meaning where none is guaranteed. That, for Voltaire, was the highest form of worship, not prayer, but participation in the continual creation of reason itself.